Hey, Taylor Elwood here, and welcome to the Men's Mysteries Podcast. Today I want to talk about something that I think is really important for men and women, really just people in general, which is how to stop objectifying your relationships. And below this podcast, I'm going to share a few tips as well as a guide that you can access that can help you take this work further. But I want to talk about this first in some detail on here. So I think one of the challenges that we have in relationship, and when I'm talking about relationship here, I'm really talking about romantic relationship, but I think some of this advice could apply to other forms of relationships, friendship, family, community, etc. So I think one of the things that ends up the challenges is that we tend to have people have a tendency to objectify their partners and themselves in the relationship. And the challenge here is, how do we even recognize that this objectification is occurring? And what does it mean to objectify someone? First, what I'm going to say in regards to objectification itself is that I think objectification occurs in many different forms. The most obvious forms are often sexualized. Like, for example, a guy sees a woman that he thinks is hot, and he instantly objectifies her. You know, he's looking at her physical appearance. He's looking at the clothes that she wears, the way her body looks, the curves, everything else, and he instantly objectifies her. Or she looks at a guy, or this same woman happens to look at him, and she sees somebody who's really well dressed, and so she objectifies him because she thinks he's probably fairly successful, probably has some money, probably seems to be successful. Objectification goes both ways. I want to be clear about that. I think that we hear about it more often in regards to how men objectify women, and yet I would argue that women objectify men as well, and that sometimes that objectification is sexual and sometimes it's around success. I think men do the same thing with women. Men tend to objectify women sexually. They objectify them in terms of physical appearance. And sometimes they objectify them as well in terms of success. Is this somebody who's going to quote unquote be successful? Not as much, because I think that there's some societal programming around that, but I do think it happens. But I think objectification can occur in other ways as well, and often more subtle ways. Let's say you've been with somebody for a while. You've gotten to know that person pretty well. There can be a tendency to start taking for granted what you know, and in the process objectifying the person. You're objectifying the person based off what you know without maintaining curiosity and trying to discover who that person is. When we get stuck in objectification, what's really happening is that we are losing out on the possibility of developing a genuine relationship with the person. And it's so easy to objectify people, because when we objectify people, we put ourselves into situations where we're really focused on what we want from that person as opposed to what the actual reality of that person is, or what we don't want. I mean, a good example of this in terms of objectification would be like, I feel like my partner's a roommate. Well, you've objectified them at this point. They've become quote unquote a roommate. What else are you missing out on, though? What is that objectification and that classification allowing you to avoid, both in regards to yourself and in regards to your romantic partner? I think that this is a really important aspect that needs to be unpacked and explored, because a lot of times when we're caught up in objectification of any type, what we're really doing is we're categorizing the person and getting them to fit into a very neat label. And I want to be clear here too at the same time that it's not like I'm going to say to you like, oh, hey, don't think that person is beautiful, or don't think that you find that person attractive. Like, that's not the point. The point is, can you look beyond just those labels and say, yeah, that person is attractive and beautiful, and I actually want to discover who that person is. And that means discovering all the parts, all the aspects of them, including the parts that maybe aren't so quote unquote attractive and beautiful, but I can appreciate who that person is and how they show up. I mean, a real, in a very real sense, with a relationship, it's that you're discovering who the person is, and part of discovering who that person is that can I be okay with this person? Can I be with this person? Can this person be okay with me, regardless of who regardless, like, and is that okayness an acceptance of the person as they are, or is it I want to grow with this person? I personally prefer the latter. I want to grow with somebody. And having been in relationships where I've been with people who, like, they haven't really wanted to grow, or at least it's been my perception that they haven't wanted to grow. And this could be where I objectified them. So see, this is a good example of, like, this objectification thing. That in and of itself becomes a really interesting challenge. And here's where I think objectification actually occurs. Objectification starts when we stop communicating, when we stop connecting, because we're no longer connecting with the person that we're involved with, whether we're interested in them or disinterested in them. Instead, we are labeling them and objectifying them, and consequently, we're not actually connecting with them in a meaningful and powerful way. So if I start to think that, for example, the person I'm with doesn't want to grow, well, how do I know that? Have I asked them? Have I gotten into conversations with them? Have I tried to reach out and discover? Or am I just conveniently putting that into place because I'm not interested in growing, or because I'm not interested in growing with them? And what would happen if I were authentic and were to say, look, this relationship isn't working for me. There's something missing here. And we either need to figure out what's missing and work on it together, or we need to agree to part ways because this isn't what either of us really wants. That would be a more real and authentic relationship with the person as they are, even if it might be one where we end up breaking things off or changing it, than when we objectify people. Objectification seems like the easy route, because if I can label someone, then I've fully got them, and I've located them, and I know who they are and what they are. Yet I would argue that objectification is absolutely one of the worst things that we could do to somebody. Because what we're actually doing is we're essentially limiting the depth of contact. And in the process, we're losing something in the equation. We're losing touch with ourselves as well. Here's an interesting facet to objectification that I'm thinking of even just right now as I'm recording this. When I objectify someone else, I'm also objectifying myself. I know we don't normally think of it that way, because it's you're objectifying someone else, but I'm also objectifying myself in relationship to that person. When I think that someone is hot and beautiful, and that's the criteria that I'm evaluating them on, I'm also evaluating myself. Am I attractive enough to get this person's attention? But am I looking at the whole picture, or am I only looking at it from a thin filter? Or if I objectify someone as a roommate, well, what am I saying about myself? I'm also, quote unquote, the roommate. I also might not be all that interesting. There's this interplay that occurs where someone is more or less connected. And the more we're connected, it's because we are actively working, playing, choosing to connect with each other and be curious about each other. The less we do this, we are just becoming we're just settling for being small at that point. We're settling for what objectification gives us, which is this comfortable discomfort where we settle for the crumbs because we don't want to actually connect. Now, if you're someone who's watching this and you're like, yeah, I feel that, or it hits something for you, I have 3 tips that I've shared below I want you to check out. And I've also shared a guide for you, which can help you kind of go even deeper with this work. What I want to encourage people to do is to really check in with themselves. What is it I really want for myself? Who is it I want to be? What does it mean to really connect with other people? And where am I using objectification as a way to protect myself from actually connecting in a meaningful and powerful way? We can have deeper, more meaningful relationships, but we need to be willing to explore what that means and honor ourselves and honor the people in our lives instead of settling for less, instead of settling for categorization and labels because it's convenient, because that convenience is actually what kills the relationship.